Hey guys, it's Alec Torelli. Welcome back to the Conscious Poker YouTube. You know, I got to interview Magnus Carlsen the other day, the greatest chess player of all time. It was a really meaningful moment for me. It's really rare to get to talk to the greatest ever in any field, let alone chess, which I didn't really mention this to Magnus. I didn't have time to get into this, but chess was kind of the precursor to poker for me. It was the game that got me involved and let me fall in love with the strategy, which is this idea that if I move here and my opponent moves there, how am I going to respond? And that same framework applies in every hand of poker you play. You're always thinking about, if I bet the flop and they raise me, what is my response to that bet? And so there's this parallel framework that I feel like chess and poker have in common. And so sitting down with Magnus to get to interview him and ask him about his thoughts on how the decision-making process in chess worked was truly incredible.
So in poker, we have this idea where there's game theory where you stick to the book strategy, and then sometimes you're trying to exploit your opponents.
So Bobby Fischer used to say, I don't believe in psychology, I believe in good moves. I kind of believe in both. I would say that obviously there are good moves and there are bad moves, but my play is definitely exploitative in chess pretty often. Especially when you sense weakness, being the more aggressive player, just like in poker, it's generally good when you sense that your opponent is not going to take every chance. You can take bigger risks, and that's going to give you better results.
And so in poker, we have this concept of you're always trying to play the player. You're trying to figure out what your opponent does and how they bet and how they play, and then you're trying to counteract that strategy. There's a big conversation in the poker community about whether or not you should take a game theory optimal approach or you should take an exploitative approach. And a game theory optimal approach is basically this idea that you're not playing the other player. You're just playing your own two cards. You're only trying to make decisions based on what is the best way to play your hand, absent of your opponent's tendencies. You're looking at these more advanced concepts down a game tree, and you're looking at whose range does the situation favor, and then you're betting when you have an advantage. And that's the basic framework that you're doing. Now, on an exploitative standpoint, you're not really taking that as much into account. You're taking that into account. That's maybe your base level understanding, evaluate a situation. But then you're also saying, okay, I understand that this situation is a good spot to bluff based on the math or based on the game theory or based on the range advantages, based on the board texture. But I know my opponent calls way too often. They have the proclivity to always call when I bet, or we have history together, or they have ego. We've battled in the past and they want to outplay me. So they're not going to fold very often when I bluff this river, and therefore I'm going to check. And that basic framework is what's called an exploitative approach, meaning you're exploiting the tendencies of your opponent, whether they're too tight or too loose or anywhere in between. You're adjusting to how they play. So you're looking at their strategy and your strategy to counteract how they play. Now, what was fascinating about talking to Magnus is that chess is diametrically different than poker in that chess is a game of complete information, right? You can see all of the pieces on the board. So there is a correct move that the computer can simulate that objectively says that this is the best move. This move has the highest probability of you winning the game. And you can tell your opponent what your strategy is in chess, but if you move your pieces better than them, you're going to win the game because they can't stop your superior moves, right? If a computer that was rated 3,000, which is an ELO rating, a measurement of ratings in chess, played me, who's rated 1,000, and it told me, hey, I'm going to move my pieces in this way, develop my pieces in this way, castle, and then attack your king in this way. And I said, okay, I know what your strategy is. I still couldn't stop them because their strategy is superior. But in poker, it's not that way. Poker is a game of incomplete information. You don't know your opponent's cards, but you still have to make decisions. And so therefore, it's a game that is much more prone to have an exploitative approach because there's a human element to the decision-making process. And very few people are sticking to the theory. People are making decisions based on emotion all the time. They're making decisions based on how they feel, whether they just won or lost a pot, if they're winning or losing, their history with you, there's ego involved, they might be on a stream, they might want to bluff you, all these sorts of factors that make people make more emotional, more exploitative, more in the moment, more in-game flow decisions. There's been a huge conversation in poker about whether it's better to adopt a game theory optimal strategy or an exploitative strategy. And my question to Magnus was basically like, look, if exploitative play still applies in a game of perfect information like chess, where there is objectivity, right? In poker, there's not objectivity. If there's objectivity in chess and exploitative play still applies, then surely it applies in poker where there's not objectivity, because the best decision is the decision that wins the most money, and that is contingent on who your opponent is and what mood they're in. But in chess, that doesn't matter. If your opponent is a crazy maniac that wants to bring his rook out at all costs, that doesn't affect what the correct strategy is for you. You're still going to develop your pieces in the best way possible, and you're still going to win the game regardless of what their moves are. You're going to counteract their moves, but you're going to do it using theory. So if exploitative play applies in chess, it must apply in poker. Because poker is it's on the other side of the spectrum than chess in this regard. And so it was really fascinating to talk to Magnus, who said that he plays an exploitative approach. He's the greatest of all time, the highest rated chess player in history. And what he's doing is he's playing a creative style of chess, so to speak. He's not only just doing exactly what the book says, he's doing a couple things which I found very interesting. First is he mentioned that he is trying to exploit his opponents. He's trying to find ways that he could put them to tough decisions that they're not used to facing so he can have an edge over them. So it's not only about the theory, it's also about trying to win the game, trying to put them to a tough spot that they're not prepared for, that he's more prepared for. So there's creativity, to me, is a word that explains this idea that you're trying to do something that is against convention. It is against what the conventional wisdom is, and it's thinking outside of the box. If you were only thinking inside of the box, you would do what the game theory says. And by definition, creativity means you're creating a new idea that is not conventional. And that's what exploitative play is in poker. I think the best poker players are much more like artists. They're innovative. They're really thinking outside the box with ideas and moves and plays. And those are the hardest players to play against. Number 2, he talked about his image, which was so fascinating.
I feel a lot of time I think in chess, you get a reputation, and then your reputation works for you. So that when people start fearing you, you can definitely exploit that. So I think there's a bit of both, obviously, but there's more of an exploitative strategy in chess than people would normally think.
In poker, your image matters a lot. For example, this might be more obvious, right? In poker, if you're known as a really aggressive player who can check raise someone at any time, people are less likely to bet into you. They're less likely to call you. They're less likely to raise you because they know that at any time you could put them to the test for their whole stack. And this metagame, right? This image that you create as an aggressive player at the table pays dividends in other ways. So for example, if you're known as a really aggressive player who raises people all the time, what happens? They adjust by betting less often against you. So if you're on the turn and people know you're capable of raising them all in, they're not going to bet the turn as often. So what happens? You get more free cards. So you see the river for free. And then maybe you could turn your hand into a bluff and bluff the river because your opponent gave up the lead in the hand. So down the game tree, all of these sorts of benefits happen if you cultivate an image. And this happens in the real world too. If you cultivate the image of being a fierce hard ass that never gets taken advantage of, people aren't going to try and pull one over on you. They're not going to try and sue you. They're not going to try and go after you in your business. They know you're going to countersue. They know you're going to attack them. They know you're going to bring them down. So there's this reciprocity that happens also in the real world, but that also happens at the poker table. If people respect you and people fear you as a player, you gain an edge over them. There's a psychological metagame edge. And so Magnus talks about this, and he talks about this in chess, which is fascinating to me because, again, if this concept of being aggressive applies in chess, it almost definitely applies in poker. And so he's trying to do things, at least from my understanding, of doing things outside the box and attacking and being aggressive. And you see this in other sports too, like tennis. It's one thing to hit the ball back to the other player. It's another thing to go for a winner. And the players that go for winners in chess, in poker, in tennis, like those are the hardest players to play against. So it was a fascinating conversation with Magnus. I'd love to continue this in a podcast in a future episode, but overall I hope you took something away from this, that play your own game, be aggressive, go for aggressive shots, go for aggressive plays, and that's what makes you hard to play against. And I think there is still room today, even in the age of AI and tech and software, there is still a lot of room. Chess has been solved for years. In 1999, the best player in the world lost to an AI. That was 25 years ago. So if there's still room in chess for creativity and exploitative play, there's no doubt that space in poker. Poker's alive. I hope you take something from this. Subscribe to this channel if you want more awesome content. See you in the next video.